Hello, Ekolu. Thank you so much for joining us in our online lessons for Wai Ekolu. In our program, we're more comfortable working with you folks in person in classrooms, out in the field, spending a lot of time together. But unfortunately, due to COVID-19 and social distancing, that is not going to be possible. So thanks again so much for going through these lessons. We have lesson 1, which is an introductory stream biodiversity lesson, as well as a virtual field trip and data exploration in lesson number 4. Again, thank you so much. Mahalo nui. Stay tuned. Before any official introductions, we always start off with this slide first. We ask for you folks to participate in thinking of 3 words that come to mind when you see this slide. There's no wrong answers. We just want some feedback for you because we like to compare with what you say or what you think to what others think, whether it's at your school, what others think in different areas of Oahu, and try to compare that, because I think it'll take some time right now to think of 3 words that come to mind when you see this slide. All right, hopefully you came up with some 3 words. It can be a color, it can be an observation, it could be a feeling. Sometimes people think about comparisons between the left side and the right side. Some people think about comparisons from Mauka to Makai. So some things I commonly hear are one side is before, one side is after. One side is urbanized, the other side is natural. Sometimes people say too much buildings. Some people think gray, some people think green, some people say blue, some people say ocean, some people say Mauka, some people say Makai. All of these words come to mind and are very familiar words to most of us. Are any of those words ones that came up on your piece of paper? Or any of those words ones that you thought of, those 3 words that you thought of earlier? Yeah, so a lot of times our ideas overlap. A lot of times we think the same thing. And sometimes there are new things that we learn from each other. So I really appreciate you participating in this virtual discussion, allowing us to figure out how is best to move forward. So with that, I think that we can move on to an official introduction of our program. Welcome to Wai Ekolu. If you are familiar with the Hawaiian language, this name means the 3 waters. And particularly for our program, it is the 3 waters that flow through the Alawai watershed: Makiki, Manoa, and Palolo streams that flow through Makiki, Manoa, and Palolo valleys. You can see these valleys. This is Palolo Valley on the left on my screen, Manoa Valley on the right, and behind this dark ridge line here, it is Makiki Valley. And we study the water that passes through these 3 areas and go down to the ocean. But before going to the ocean, these 3 streams get intercepted by a canal. And this canal you may be familiar with is called the Alawai Canal. It is perpendicular to the flow of our streams and parallel to the ocean down by Waikiki, where you can see here down by the coastline. So not only do we study the streams, what lives in them, and the stream biodiversity in them, we also study what depends on this water. Not only do people depend on the water that flows through our land, but there's a lot of different plants and animals that live in this area, whether they're native or they're non-native. With that, let's start off with some of the things that depend on this water, or who this water is important to. So a lot of these plants and a lot of these animals you may have seen before, something that they all have in common. They are all native species here coming to Hawaii, meaning they got to Hawaii on their own without the help of people. So a lot of these things, again, may be familiar to you, and some of them may not be familiar to you. Usually I ask for people to raise their hands and ask which ones they want to hear about more, or ones that they do not know about, so that they can be more informed about them. So I'm just going to go through all of them really quickly, saying a little bit about each. Here on the top left corner, we have our Hawaiian lobelia called koli'i. This particular one is found way up high in the Ko'ola mountain range on Oahu, but you might find some other species on other mountain ranges and other areas of Hawaii. There's not a lot of them left in the lower elevations. We only found them at high elevations. And it doesn't always look like this particular picture here. This particular one is in bloom, where there's long stalks of flowers or blossoms along it. And it will only do this once in its life before dying. It usually looks like a small palm tree pretty much like that plant you see there without the long stalks of blossoms. The next one, it is two fish and an eel. Those two fish are omilu, and they are working in a tag team or in combination with that moray eel, trying to get out a taco or a he'e from under that coral head. After that eel wrestled that octopus out of the coral head, those two fish attacked the octopus as well, and they all shared that meal together. A few different animals working together to hunt some prey. The next animal is a pupukuahivi, or sometimes we call it a helicarionid snail, and also called it a cinnamon bun snail. This one was taken on Mount Ka'ala, which is the other mountain range in comparison with the Ko'ola mountain range, and it has the highest peaks on Oahu. So the fourth picture that you can see there, if you can't tell, those are all dolphins, and this particular ones are called spinner dolphins, or naia. These spinner dolphins were swimming off of West Oahu, and they usually come near the shoreline during the day to rest. They even recreate, but they go hunting out in deeper waters at night. And the last one we have there is our Hawaiian monk seal. Hawaiian monk seal, we couldn't tell, is facing us. I had a big zoom lens to take this picture, so I wasn't that close to it because you don't want to disturb these animals. But yeah, it's basking there on a beach, and sometimes you see them around town or even in Waikiki, but they're more likely to be in places where there is not so many people. The next picture, it is a picture of Honu, or the Hawaiian green sea turtle. This was taken off of West Oahu, and they were around a coral head where there was a bunch of herbivorous fishes grazing the algae off of their backs. In the next picture here, we can see the Hawaiian happy face spider. There's a couple different Hawaiian names that I've seen for this animal. Its Hawaiian name is Nana Nana Makaki'i, or I've also heard of Nana Nana Makahauri, which is again translation to a happy face spider or a happy patterned face spider. So these animals are actually very small. They have very tiny eggs there. This is a small leaf that's only a few inches long. This leaf is only about 5 inches long. So those eggs are about the size of grains of sand. And that spider there, it's smaller than your pinky nail. So even with its legs stretched out. So yeah, it's pretty small. The next one is a opaiula, and it's found in anchialine ponds. And these anchialine ponds are inland ponds that are filled with brackish water. They are not tide pools, and then they're not connected by any surface water to the ocean. This animal is very small, probably about a centimeter long, and sometimes they can be very red, sometimes they can be very clear. Again, you might find these in the aquarium trade, where you might see these little tiny shrimp sold in small aquariums or closed up aquariums that people might even have on their desk at work or even in a classroom. That next picture there are a Hawaiian mollusk called opihi. Some of you guys might eat opihi. Some of you guys may be very foreign to it. These are one of 3 species that occur in Hawaii. They can be found along rocky shorelines in the intertidal, where there's a lot of waves crashing, a lot of oxygenation of water. The next one is the wili wili tree. And the wili wili tree doesn't always look like this with orange blossoms. They can have other colored blossoms too, but orange is the most common that I see. But when they do bloom like this, they will drop their leaves. So they don't always have bare branches like this with just flowers on it. They will actually have leaves on them in other times of year. And the third row in the first picture is a carnivorous caterpillar. And this guy is actually pretty small too. As you can see, it's on a leaf there and pretending to be a stick. It is camouflaging itself so that it prevents animals from preying on it, but so it can prey on other animals as well. These particular animals will eat insects. So you can see right here, this is a carnivorous caterpillar attacking a small fly. Again, very tiny, that one's probably only about a ½ inch long. Next picture here is a bunch of small fish in shallow water along a beach. They are baby goldfish, which are called oama, and the adults are called veke in Hawaii. We sometimes catch them for bait in Hawaii, and we even eat these sometimes. And these ones are not, these ones are pretty small right here, where they're about as long as my hand, maybe about 5-6 inches. They're pretty small, and I'm feeding them there some bait, so they're kind of eating and they're kind of posing in front of the camera. The next picture is a very important plant to Hawaii. You can see ohia lehua, and this is on a mountaintop on Oahu. So they're very important for capturing water in Hawaii, particularly rainwater or even cloud water. That you can see there's a cloud there, and it is passing through the vegetation on the top of that mountain. The fourth picture in this row is the Hawaiian stilt. And if you've seen these animals before, they occur in wetlands or in areas where there's very shallow water. They're a very unusual looking bird, but something that's unfortunate about them is that they are in danger. So there's not a lot of them on Oahu because a lot of the areas where they usually would live are now urbanized or covered with other types of landscapes that are not very natural. You still may find them in areas on Oahu like Hamakua Marsh or Kauai Nui Marsh. There's still quite a bit of them there. And the Hawaiian name for these are called Io. The last one is the Hawaiian giant dragonfly called Pina'o. And you might see two animals there on your screen. And one is an adult that is newly hatched from a juvenile or larvae lower down on that grass stalk. So again, that dragonfly hatched out of this larvae here after living part of its life in a stream or in water. And after a certain amount of time, they will metamorphose and crawl out of their stream. And it's kind of like a butterfly and a caterpillar. Stage right here is kind of skipping the pupa form. It doesn't spin its own chrysalis or pupa. It hatches directly out of the larvae after climbing out of. Okay, the reason why I was talking to you about some of those animals is that they have all traveled very, very far to get here. They have traveled here from different continents or islands in the Pacific. And for any of those plants or for any of those animals, it is not an easy task. They come from very far away to get here to these islands, which is of the most isolated group of islands in the world. So whether they come here by flying, whether they come here by wind, whether they come floating here by water, or even swimming that distance to Hawaii by water, it is a far distance. So for Wai Ekolu, we like to focus a lot more of the ones that travel here by water. Not necessarily the whales or the dolphins or the turtles and sharks or things you may have seen on the other slide. We like to focus on ones that have come to Hawaii by these arrows. And if you're not familiar with what these arrows are, they are ocean currents. They have a very cyclical or pattern-like way they occur in the Pacific. And this is a very simplified version of how it looks, where it is clockwise in the north and counterclockwise in the south, and an equatorial countercurrent. Again, if you were to look at a realistic or video of what the currents look like in the Pacific, it'll be much more complex, with much more currents and gyres that occur all over this map. But simplified and distorted to focus on Hawaii, a lot of animals can travel here, whether again, those large animals we talked about in the previous slide, or even smaller animals, ones that you don't think about too much. And these animals here, this baby fish, this baby snail, and this baby barnacle, and this baby crab, they are all zooplankton. And these zooplankton grow older into much larger animals that have different abilities for movement, but they all use these currents to distribute their species across different bodies of water. Whether there's snails floating around in the ocean, whether there are shrimp or crustaceans floating around in the ocean, and whether there are fish floating around the ocean, they all use these ocean currents, again, to distribute their species fairly long distances. So currents are very important to distributions of these marine species. What about freshwater species? We know that our Hawaiian Islands are volcanic, and at one point in history, there were no freshwater streams on these islands. It took a lot of wind and rain and erosion for all of these processes to happen to form these freshwater streams. How did our freshwater animals get here from so far away, from other islands in the Pacific, from our neighboring continents, thousands of miles away? That's a very interesting question. Our animals here have a very interesting life cycle, and it has some overlap with some of the animals that I talked to you about earlier, especially on the slide showing the isolation of our islands with the plankton on it. So older animals, or adults, and our teenagers, the older animals live in fresh water. When they are old enough to reproduce, they will lay eggs, like how most fish do. And when those babies hatch, they will float downstream and become zooplankton, or animal plankton in the ocean. And they will stay in the ocean for up to 6 months. During this time, they have a very different lifestyle than their parents had, where adults are typically living on the bottom of streams, but these animals have a very pelagic lifestyle, where they're floating around the ocean and feeding on other types of plankton. But after those 6 months, they migrate back towards freshwater. But how do they know where to go out in that vast ocean? They know where to go because they can smell the freshwater. but it really depends how much fresh water is going out to the ocean. The more fresh water, there is more of a chemical trail for them to follow. For instance, when is there more fresh water in the ocean when compared to other times? It is after our heavy rain events and when there are big storms that pass through our islands. More fresh water flows off of our land and out to the ocean, and this is kind of a breadcrumb trail for animals to migrate back to our streams. Their home stream, or the stream that they were born, may not be storming at the right time in their pelagic or ocean life phase for them to go back to the same stream. So they do not have to go back to the same stream. They're going to go to the stream that they get the best chemical trail out of at a given time. So they don't have to go back to the same stream. They can go to other streams in our islands. So animals from Molokai could go to the Big Island. Animals from the Big Island could come to Oahu. Animals from Maui could go to Kauai. Maybe not in those specific directions, but there is evidence that shows these animals can go between our islands using the ocean currents. So at this time, when they come back in their keiki stage, for our fishes, we call them hinana, but they go upstream again to the area of the stream that is best adapted to them. And they will grow into adults and repeat the cycle over again. So learning our fishes first, we call them oopu. Take some time to practice these names as we go through them. So we have 5 different oopu species in Hawaii. The first one, oopu alamo'o. Second one, oopu no pili. Oopu na kea. Oopu na niha. Oopu a kupa. These are 5 of our oopu species that live in our stream that all have that type of life cycle that we just talked about, where they need access to the ocean. We have other species that live in our streams that also have that same type of life cycle that requires them to go to the ocean. They are invertebrates called opai. We have 2 different species of opai, opai kalaole and opai oeha'a. We have 2 types of mollusks in our streams, hihiwai and hapapai. These are our freshwater species, again, that are migratory, having that life cycle that connects them to the ocean from freshwater streams. Without that connection, that life cycle cannot be completed. Something else very, very interesting about them, besides being native to Hawaii, traveling very far to get here, and having that life cycle, which includes both freshwater and the ocean, is that they have this ability to climb up into our mountain ranges here in Hawaii. And not many of you guys thought you'd be learning about animals that climb up into the mountains. And especially if you can tell from these images here, they are not in water right now. But these animals can breathe outside of water as long as their gills do not dry up. So you guys see a snail, you guys may see a shrimp, and you guys see a fish, and all of them have this ability to climb waterfalls. And not just small waterfalls that are 5 or 6 feet high. They can be hundreds of feet high. They can climb up and around these waterfalls, and they don't want to climb up the center of this waterfall because that's where all the force is trying to push them down. For a scale, there's a little image or a little picture of a person there. And that is me taking pictures of these animals climbing around the sides of the waterfalls. So again, it's not something that I only read in a book or saw on a website. It's something that I see personally when I'm out there looking for these animals, is that I see them climbing. And it is a mind-blowing feat, because this particular waterfall, if you can just only guess by the scale of the size of myself, is that it's about 300 feet tall. And I know this is because the rope that was using to go up and down this waterfall was about 330 feet. All right, moving on. We know that they can climb, and whether it's a shrimp, whether it's a snail, we can imagine how those animals might climb, but how do fish climb? And fish are a little bit different, because fish, they have an adaptation, or they don't have any arms. Fish don't have any arms or legs, and they don't have the same kind of abilities that snails or shrimp might have, but they have a modified set of fins on the bottom of their body. This adaptation on the bottom of their body, which is a fused pelvic fin, you can see, which is under my thumbnail. And it uses this to help cling to surfaces. And you can see in this picture, it is a Oopu no pili climbing using its mouth in addition to its pectoral fins on the sides of its body and its suction cup on the bottom of its body. So it kind of uses its entire body to help climb, and it's not only the suction cup that allows it to climb itself. So we talked about how these animals can climb, whether they are a shrimp, whether they're a snail, whether they are a fish. But not all of them climb equally. We have two species that are excellent climbers, Oopualamo'o and Opai Kalaole. These ones climb to the highest parts of our streams, way up high in the mountains, able to climb up waterfalls that are hundreds of feet tall. Here on the left, we can see Oopualamo'o, and we can see two different colors of them. Juveniles and females look this color on the left, and this orange and black version are what adult males look like. On the right, we have two different colors of Opai Kalaole, and that often just depends on the background of the animal. Sometimes it may look more green and grayish, other times it may look more brown. Again, these two animals are our highest climbers. Those two animals that we just talked about pass these three animals in our middle elevations of our streams. We have Hihiwai, Oopu no pili, and Oopu na kea. These three animals can climb pretty well, but they don't climb giant waterfalls like the first two we talked about. They can climb up the ones that you can see that are pictured, but not the ones that are hundreds and hundreds of feet tall. So the first two and these three, we know that their life cycle includes them going to the ocean. So they all have to pass through this lower area down near this estuary, where there is a mixture of fresh and salt water called brackish water. They are also passing these four animals, which tend to stay down here in our lower sections of our streams. Opai oiha'a, hapawai, oopu na niha, and the oopu akupa. So these ones don't climb very much higher than the lower sections of our stream, but they can climb some. You can get over some of those smaller waterfalls, but not anything very big. So if you folks remember, how many animals live in our upper parts of our stream? How many animals live in the middle parts of our streams? How many animals live in the lower parts of our streams? And if you remember, how many total animals need to go to the ocean for part of their life, especially when they are larvae? There are 9 animals that need to go to the ocean. 4 of them live in the lower sections of the stream. 3 of them live most of their lives in the middle parts of their stream, and 2 of them get to the very highest parts of our streams up way up high in the mountains. Whether you are any of those animals we talked about, the hihiwai, in oopu, in opai, which side would you think they would live on? The left side, the natural side, or on the disturbed side? Well, if you're thinking about this correctly, there's better connection to the ocean on the left side, and you might imagine there are some barriers to their migration on the disturbed side. So if I were to look at one of those sides, I hope you can agree that this is what a natural stream might look like. Waterfalls, cool, clear water, fast flowing water, a lot of agitation of water where there's a lot of churning, there's a lot of boulders in it. The stream banks are not removed of vegetation. There's a lot of trees. There's no erosion. There's no sidewalks. There's no buildings. There's no homes or roads. And definitely not any pollution. If we were to put a camera on the water at that site, we'd likely see a lot of oopu. These particular ones are called oopu no pili, and they're in very high density. There's probably about 20 of them in a square meter here, or maybe about a square yard area. When we look at this stream, this is a very non-natural stream, a very urbanized stream. All the trees are removed from the stream banks. The stream is concreted to hold in water to prevent flooding for the people that live in this area. We can see a lot of houses. We can see bridges. We can see cars. There's also a lot of trash and probably a lot of runoff from the landscapes that are now modified to fit human needs. But if we were to think about the temperature of that water there flowing over that concrete in that bright sunny day, it is a lot warmer than the previous stream we just looked at. There are still animals that live in this stream, but maybe not the ones that you're thinking. There's not a lot of oopu that live here, but there are other species of animals that you folks may be familiar with. Maybe you've seen them before in the pet store. These are bristlenose catfish that are commonly sold in pet stores in Hawaii. So we just talked about 9 of those native species that we should be familiar with now. 5 are oopu, two opai and two different mollusks, the hihivai and hapavai. But for every animal that we discuss, there is a non-native animal that is out competing it and displacing it of its natural habitat. And this is when we start to call them invasive, when they are taking over the habitats of other species and their population is booming. We have live bearers, things like guppies, mollies, and swordtails that are common in the aquarium trade. Bristlenose catfish and suckermouth catfish, again, popular in the aquarium trade. Smallmouth bass, more popular in recreational fishing, but people also have those as pets as well. Many different types or many species of cichlids, including tilapia and convict cichlids that we find in streams very regularly. You might see a lot of these cichlids in the aquarium trade. Japanese swamp shrimp, often called grass shrimp, that are sold in pet stores for maybe 10 or 20 for $1 as feeder animals to other species. Again, very common in our Hawaiian streams here. Tahitian prawns, initially brought here for food here in Hawaii, but they are also migratory, just like our other native Hawaiian species. So their babies need to go to the ocean. And once they were introduced to one stream, they were introduced basically to all freshwater streams in Hawaii because their larvae went out to the ocean and recolonized all of our freshwater streams just the same way as our natives do. Crayfish, again, very popular in the aquarium trade as pets, but some people eat them for food. And the last one, there's a lot of different types of snails that are brought here, both for food and for ornamental aquarium trade as well. I know about these species, again, not only because I read them in a book or saw them online. I've been going out into freshwater streams since I was a kid, looking at what's there. But professionally, I've also been looking at this as well, looking at things that occur in different streams and figuring out the best way to score them. This particular paper, a native species index of biological integrity for Hawaiian stream environments. This is written by my boss, Mike Keto, and he used these metrics to evaluate streams across the state. And it has to do with 5 ecological categories. You can see on the left, taxonomic richness, looking for sensitive sentinel species, reproductive capacity, trophic habitat capacity, and tolerance capacity. And those are further divided into 11 metrics, where it has to do with the number of native species found, the different types of native species found, the percentage of native taxa that are found in our streams, the number of alien taxa, sensitive native fish and their densities, as well as their sizes. Again, reproductive individuals score higher in our streams because we know that there are animals contributing to the next generation, as opposed to animals that are trying to migrate inland but don't make it to adulthood to reproduce. Certain species are better indicators of habitat quality and connectivity and biological integrity, like Awalis guamensis that you might see. A more accurate name of it is Awalis staminaeus. Through genetics, it was determined that this species is unique to Hawaii and it's not conspecific with Guam, as you can see in the name there, guamensis. So it's different from the Guam species. We look at all native fish density. We look at community weighted averages that you guys examining more in depth in our lesson 4. Looking at the tolerant alien species that are dominating our landscapes, as well as how many of these species are diseased or parasitized. Each of these questions are scored at best 5 points each for a total of 55. The worst category of points you get is a score of 1 point each. So the lowest score is 11. And again, you only can get a score of 1, 3, or 5 for this criteria. You cannot get a 2 or 4 or even fractions of a point. Again, there's a lot of math involved in doing these surveys or these quizzes that we do every time we go out into the field, or trying to get a better understanding of how data looks after we go out into the field, or after going out to so many study sites. Our 55-point scoring sites, ones that we call our reference sites that score 100% for biological integrity, look more like this, where all of our native species are present in the densities they're supposed to be, at the elevations they're supposed to be at, whether they're upper, middle, or lower elevation species. But after we change or modify our habitats, so watershed alterations, deforestation, increasing the amount of erosion and runoff and sediment into our streams, removing water from those streams, are concreting our streams for flood control, or even polluting streams with all kinds of trash and other chemicals, this affects our biodiversity and our biological integrity. So we can see as those things on the x-axis happen, our population starts to shift from lower densities, it shifts in abundance of our native species, and then we start to see our invasive species that we just talked about start to dominate our streams, all the way down to where we don't find any native species anymore, where they are now impaired. As you can see, these ecological categories on the right. Now to look at some real data. Again, same axes, biological integrity on the y-axis on a 100% scoring system, and habitat quality on the x-axis. We can see a scatter plot and a regression line of all of the data that we've looked at from about 1999 to 2010, I believe. We have a legend at the top of the screen where there's islands are categorized by different colors. So which island is doing the worst off biological integrity? And we can see that Oahu is not doing so good for biological integrity. Where are the best streams located in Hawaii? It is not only on, I know you can see the colors on the top right hand corner where there's some green, pink, and some turquoise dots. So again, Molokai, Kauai, and also Maui. But it is not only those islands in general, it is those streams on those islands that are furthest from people. We have a lot of people throughout Hawaii, but we can clearly see that Oahu is doing the poorest, where there are the most people and the most development through our watersheds. The way we do this when we go out to study streams is that at least in clean streams, we do snorkel surveys. We count the number and the densities of these animals we see, and we also need to time ourselves. And again, we don't do this in dirty streams where we use different methods. Our teams never consist of probably more than 2 to 4 people at a time. Again, these methods are very particular to the group size that we have. So we can see with these small teams of people here, this type of method is called electrofishing as opposed to snorkel surveying. We use a weak electric current in water to prevent fish from swimming away. If you are familiar with electricity, it messes up your ability to control your muscles. We don't set it very high because we don't want to kill any of these animals. We just want them to prevent them from swimming upstream. And you can see in these fast flowing streams that we can catch them as they come downstream. I don't like doing this method. It has the potential to harm animals, whether they're native or non-native species. When we have a lot more people present, we can do a different method called pa'e pa'e. And this method needs a lot of hands. Again, a lot more people are present, and there's no really specific age of people that is required to do this. Whereas snorkel surveying and electrofishing requires you definitely to be 18 years old. So you can see that these students here are doing the pa'e pa'e method, where they're herding animals, making a lot of noise, using nets and sticks to agitate the water, make them get scared into nets that are blocking the area downstream. When the animals are chased all the way downstream and those nets are closed together, we lift them and we have a whole bunch of animals there. But we can't go out into the field without learning how to do this first. So we need to do a lot of rehearsal, which is what we do after our lesson 1 and our second lesson together, lesson 2. In lesson 2, we talk about safety, talk about what to wear, what to expect, how to collect the data in our specific set of methods. However, in lesson 3, if we are ready to go out into the field, we can go to a stream that's best for your group size and the age of your class or age of your group, and we can get this survey data. Afterwards, we can explore this data in the classroom, understanding what our data means and what is it good, is it bad, what can we do about this data, how is it like across all of our stream sites, what is it like in different times of the year, what about between years, is it getting better, is it getting worse? All right, some of you guys might be wondering, what do we do with these animals after we catch them? Because all you guys saw was a bunch of animals in nets. You can imagine we need to separate out our species from the ones that are native from non-native. So our native species are taken out of the net first, and they are put in a separate bucket from our non-natives or invasive species. So just like this girl you see here on the right-hand side of the screen, she has a non-native in her right hand, and so that was a smallmouth bass. This is an opunakea. This is a crayfish. and there are more opu. And again, we're trying to separate this out into different buckets, trying to get our natives taken out first because we don't want them injured. All of our natives go back into the stream where they're supposed to be, while all of our invasives are taken out of the stream and put on ice and in coolers and taken to farms where they can be composted after they are euthanized or they're dead. I want to remind you folks that it is a very sad thing. All of our non-native species are being sacrificed. But again, I want you guys to focus on what is important to our streams. What kind of animals are supposed to be there? Is passage for our native stream animals being allowed, or are we obstructing it? What can we do to do better? And we already can figure out that taking our invasives out of our streams helps in our fish passage by removing the biological barriers for our native species. But I want to also let you know, again, these invasive animals that are being composted, they're not just being buried in the ground and being put to waste. They are being used as fertilizer for a lot of different plants to grow. Some of the farms that we take them to, they grow native species restoration projects where they're putting native forest species back in the forest after removing invasive forest species. When we don't catch a lot of fish, a lot of the composted invasive species is used as fertilizer in my garden. So you can see my garden is flourishing and it reduces the amount of fertilizer that I need to purchase from Home Depot or any other garden store. You can see it's just some of the harvest that we get weekly from my garden. And I wish that I didn't get fertilizer from this project. It's not the point of this project. It's not to get fertilizer. It's again to restore fish passage to animals and native species that deserve to be in our stream habitats. But that is being ignored by a lot of people in Hawaii. Another very important part of this lesson together is the data. You guys will be examining this data pretty thoroughly in our lesson 4. And this is what you guys will be looking at. Native and alien species, another name are exotic species. Sometimes we call them invasive, again, if they're dominating and displacing the habitat native species occurs in. We have a total count for all of these species that you see here out in the right. And we can use these 11 metrics from the Hawaii Stream Index of Biological Integrity to score them. Out of 5 points each, you can see 1, 3s, or 5s for each of these 11 metrics for a total of 21 at this particular site. So 21 points out of 55 is 38.2%, which on any kind of exam or survey that you might take is a pretty poor score. But for our stream study sites, that's much higher than average score. We usually get ones that are about 30 or a little over 30%, but when we get anything near 40, it's pretty amazing. And if you guys know, there's those ecological categories that they can shift once you get above 40% from being impaired to being poor or very poor, all the way up to being a reference site. So we do this at 20 sites, Makiki Stream, Manoa Stream, and Pololo Stream. And it just depends on the size of your group, as well as the age of your group. We go to different study sites. Sometimes if you are a school that's in Pololo, Manoa, or Makiki Valley, we'll go to the study site that's closest to your school. So it can be a walking field trip, whereas some schools need to catch buses to go to these study sites. Let's look at a little data that we got from Wai Ekolu for our citizen science data that our students collect from our different study sites. So when we average our data by year per each field trip that we go on. So this is the amount of animals that we may capture in this first line here, our native species that we capture on average each field trip. From 2017 all the way to 2020, you can see that the trend is increasing over these 4 years. Given that in 2020, we haven't done that many surveys yet, and because of social distancing and COVID-19, that we have to put a halt to our survey. So we'll see what happens in 2020. We can also see in the next line, in the second row, that the number of invasives are going down from 2017 to 2020. This trend is decreasing over the years. We can see that biological integrity, our HSIBI, the 11 metrics that we use to score our study sites, is also increasing throughout these past 4 years. And in general, the biomass that we remove each year, it is decreasing over time. But again, we have to see what 2020 has to hold for us, because you can see that's a little high there. But our last field trip, we went to a study site that had a lot of animals. So we expect that this average is going to decrease to under 4 pounds per field trip by the end of 2020, but it depends when we can get out into the field again. This graph highlights our oldest study site. The first one that we studied at Kameki High School between 2016 and 2019. We can see that on the y-axis, it has the number of natives that are captured each field trip. Each red dot is a field trip that we go on. And we can see the number of site visits or the number of field trips or field surveys that we have on the x-axis. We can see there's a regression. So the regression or trend line is showing that there is a pretty convincing increase of native species over time as the years pass after removing so much of our invasive species. And again, not all of our sites have been visited as many times as Kameki High School. Some study sites were established much later in 2017 and 2018. So only time will tell what's going to happen throughout our different streams. But in general, if we average our data across all of our sites, because again, we have to think of our streams in a systematic way, meaning the entire stream has to be scored as one. So we need to study as many of these study sites as possible. And we can't just weigh one site over another. We have to average a score from Mauka all the way to Makai, our upper elevation sites, our middle elevation sites, all the way down to our lower elevation sites. It needs to be a summary of all of its scores. So with that, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. I know it was a long talk, and it's a lot to have to watch online versus being in there in person, having something more interactive where we can ask questions and answer questions that you might have. But hopefully you folks learned a lot, and it's really important that you guys understand this project does not work with all of you. There are so many schools and so many educators, and there's so much of the community that's working together to help take care of their place, practice aloha aina. This project doesn't work without all of your hands and all of your hearts. So mahalo nui, and thank you so much for your time. We usually have a lot of live animals we bring to the classroom for you folks to see, so you know what to expect when we go on the field trip together, and you folks have a good idea of what they look like. Whether there are 5 o'opu, opu akupua, opu naniha, opu nakea, opu alamo'o, opu no pili. Feel free to review these pictures if you want. And again, this is our most common one that we see in our stream sites, from our upper elevation stream sites all the way down to our lower elevation stream sites. This is opu nakea. You can tell by the banding pattern on its tail, as well as the modeling along the sides of its body. Also, its downward turned mouth and a kind of a fat upper lip you can see there near its head. We also have a lot of invasive species. Again, live bearers, these are different types of guppies, swordtails, and mollies that we find in our site from top to bottom. We have different types of catfish. Sometimes there are different sizes of them. The bristle-nosed catfish on the top versus the sucker-mouthed catfish on the bottom. You can tell the differences in them. You can also tell that they can occur in really high densities. You can see here, there's a lot of them being chased downstream from the upstream team, getting chased into the downstream team nets. This is particular places at Kameki High School where there's quite a lot of them. You can see the student lifting this net and it's filled with catfish. And you can tell the differences between these two species because of differences in their morphology and their head. Bristle nose, or sometimes they're called bushy nose. They have bristles on the sides of their heads and they have bushiness, these filaments on their nose. You might have seen it in the earlier picture where it has some looks like it has a mustache. The sucker-mouthed catfish does not have this. The differences in their tails should be very clear, where one has white dots in the corners of its tail. It doesn't have a sickle-shaped tail like the sucker-mouthed catfish. So the bristle nose, again, has white spots in the corners of its tail and has very clear spots on its tail. And on the sucker-mouthed catfish, there's less apparent spots on it. And there's a sickle shape more and doesn't have white spots on the ends of the tail or the tips of the tail. There's also smallmouth bass that we find in the streams that are very carnivorous and can eat native species. You can see that smallmouth bass in our fish tank has eaten live animals. That was a molly. We do not feed our smallmouth bass natives, but if you can imagine that guppy was only dropped in there for a couple seconds before an invasive ate it. So we can only imagine that smallmouth bass don't really concern themselves with the differences between native and non-native prey. We also have different types of cichlids in our stream. On the top here, we have a black-chin tilapia, and on the bottom, we have these zebra-like convict cichlids. Again, There are many different cichlids that we find in streams, but these are the two most common that we find in our study sites. There's also a different species of tilapia, the Mozambique tilapia, which we also find in a few of our study sites actually. And these are aquarium shrimp. This is the Japanese swamp shrimp that's popularly sold in the aquarium trade, different from our native shrimp that are able to climb, but these aquarium shrimp are able to climb up waterfalls as well. I didn't mention this earlier, but the bristlenose catfish is capable of climbing up waterfalls just like our native species can too. So that's a big problem, the distribution of invasive species and their ability to climb. Again, the Tishan prawn, another animal that has a migratory life cycle where its larvae go to the ocean and can distribute across large regions in our islands. So again, it's introduced to one stream in Molokai decades ago, and then another stream on Oahu about 10 years later, and now they're found in all perennial streams, ones that flow year-round. Again, crayfish, you can find these in pet stores, but you might find them also in ponds or even in our lo'ikalo or tile patches. And again, different types of snails that we see in streams. Other species of snails that you might see, like apple snails, that I don't usually see in our Wai Ekolu streams, but they occur in other streams on Oahu. So thank you guys for listening to lesson 1 together, and I hope you guys are going to be joining us for our other lessons together, our virtual field trip, as well as our data exploration lesson. If you have any questions, you can find my contact information at corey.edu, coryyy@hawaii.edu. And you can also find our contact information on the Wai Ekolu website, and your teacher should be able to put you in contact with us as well. Mahalo nui, thank you so much. I'm hoping that your support from your guys' school will continue the following years, even if this year things are a little difficult. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay indoors. Mahalo nui, aloha.